The Guardian put out an article. Of course, it was an opinion piece because they didn't want to possibly say that, Israel trying to execute journalists is a bad thing just officially. They wanted to make an opinion piece. But the title is, Why Has Israel Detained American Journalist Jeremy Loffredo? And this is, again, I mentioned it on Thursday. This is the Grayzone journalist Jeremy Loffredo, who was captured, beaten, essentially kidnapped, all his devices stolen. And he is now out for the moment, out of prison, but not allowed to leave the state of Israel, and could be, sentenced to a lot more time. It's not over for him. American Jeremy Loffredo was one of 5 journalists reportedly detained by the IDF on October 9th. He's reportedly charged with endangering national security. Well, if the truth endangers your national security, then maybe you got a fucked up nation right there. Isn't that a problem? It's kind of similar with the U.S. If the truth is a real threat to your national security, then maybe your nation should stop behaving like a dighole. Anyway, endangering national security and aiding and sharing information with the enemy, apparently because of his reporting on Iranian strikes. So they're claiming that reporting, like being a reporter, is sharing information with the enemy. Loffredo has reportedly been released from custody, but is barred from leaving Israel as authorities try to build their case against him. But no matter what direction it takes, it should serve to highlight the plight of dozens of Palestinian journalists who are being held incommunicado in Israeli prisons. Incommunicado, of course, is Italian for pasta. No, I'm kidding. It means not in communication. But but I do like that The Guardian did not just make this about Jeremy Loffredo. They made it about the Palestinian journalist. And of course, one of the only reasons, or the only reason, that his story is so much bigger and is getting talked about so much more and is even being covered by The Guardian is because he's an American. As Israel continues to assassinate one journalist after another, those aren't Americans for the most part, and therefore they don't matter, according to most Western media. Loffredo's American citizenship makes it more likely, but by no means guaranteed, that the Biden administration might actually care that he's being detained. After all, Joe Biden was eager to claim credit for the release of journalists Evan Gershkovich and Alsu Kurmasheva, who were held in Russian prison on bogus charges. So yeah, but there's a big difference here, right? One is it serves U.S. imperial propaganda to say Biden freed these Americans that Russia was holding. Yay! Because it's anti-Russian. Whereas it does not serve U.S. propaganda to say, oh, Israel is threatening to execute an American journalist for doing journalism. Israel, it reminds us, is a sovereign country, albeit one whose wars we bankroll. That excuse is not available when the journalist is American. And then they put in parentheses here, although that hasn't helped much in the case of Shireen Abu Akleh. Shireen Abu Akleh, as you recall, is the American journalist who was executed by the IDF. This is before October 7th, before a year ago. Interestingly, I was inside the National Press Club. This is like over a year ago, year and a half ago or something. And for a Assange event, and the National Press Club is in D.C. It was a block from where I used to film RT, which also means, Redacted Tonight. Which means it's also a block from the White House. And I went in there, and it's where, it's considered where all the mainstream journalists can go and hang out, but it's also where they have press conferences, but it's not only their press conferences. You can also, like Jill Stein would have a press conference in the National Press Club and sometimes and things like that. But when I went in there, they had a giant poster plasma screen of Shireen Abu Akleh celebrating her after she had been murdered. But hilariously, the national press is funded by and is they're the ones who are writing, the vast majority of them are the ones writing the articles that manufacture the consent for war that got Shireen Abu Akleh killed. They're the ones that create the propaganda that allows us to continue the wars, that allows Israel to continue committing war crimes, that allows Israel to continue to commit genocide, that got Shireen Abu Akleh killed. And yet they put up a big poster of her. It's kind of like the statues of MLK that we have in the nation's capital and elsewhere. Oh, sure, they executed him, but now we can put up statues of him. Anyway, it complicates matters that Loffredo reports for the Grayzone, an outlet that has been accused of carrying Russian and Chinese propaganda. Here is The Guardian being The Guardian. Grayzone has no connection to Russia or China. They've not taken money from either of those governments, and they are not, carrying water for them. They just happen to, like me, want to report the truth and are not beholden to the U.S. corporate shit show, and therefore they're accused of being connected to Russia and China. And something this Guardian article does not mention is that the Washington Post, also over a year ago, published an article going after the Grayzone, trying to malign them, trying to define them, which is often one and the same. And they claimed that, oh, the Grayzone appears to maybe have been funded by Iran or something. Completely false. But I think it might have been Kit Clarenberg was pointing out, how much do you want to bet that the Israeli government, as they try and prosecute Jeremy Loffredo, are using that Washington Post article that's completely false to say, look, Loffredo's outlet is funded by Iran. Completely false. But they use it to try and go after people like Grayzone reporters. The administration is embroiled in a separate and constitutionally dubious fight against alleged propagandists. I assume they're talking about the one against the Uhuru 4, against Scott Ritter, or against the company that they claim a couple of RT employees last year helped fund, that then funneled money to like Tim Pool and Dave Rubin. I assume that's what they're talking about. The day of Loffredo's arrest, another Grayzone reporter had a heated exchange with the State Department spokesperson, Matthew Miller. I covered that on this show because it was hilarious to watch a Grayzone reporter at the State Department press conference say, how long are you going to let this genocide go on? And of course, the State Department's like, what? What genocide? What are you talking about? And then he said, well, you stand up there and spit this bullshit. And then they were like, no, you can't say the words that are real. But whether Loffredo's detention is justifiable has nothing to do with Grayzone's editorial standards, which Grayzone reports more truth than the Guardian does. So this is another bit of the Guardian being the Guardian, taking jabs at Grayzone, while Grayzone does better reporting than the Guardian. Editorial standards, it's solely a question of whether he was arrested for a crime or for reporting stories authorities didn't want told. If Israel's theory is that reporters illegally share information with the enemy whenever the enemy reads the news, that could criminalize a whole lot of journalism. Yeah, basically, it would criminalize all good journalism. Any type of journalist is legit covering what's actually going on. It would criminalize that. Dissenter reports that several more mainstream journalists reported similar information and footage that Loffredo did. And now I want to show you that. This is from Dan Cohen, who is pointing out that Loffredo was beaten and detained in Israel for reporting the exact same information about damage caused by Iranian strikes that PBS reported. Here's PBS correspondent Nick Schifrin and his post showing him reporting about the damage done in Israel. So basically, PBS reports it, not arrested. Jeremy Loffredo reports it, and because he's with Grayzone and it's easier to go after him than to go after a U.S. government outlet like PBS, U.S. government-funded outlet like PBS, they arrest Jeremy Loffredo under charges that could ultimately see him in prison the rest of his life. Boy, slight difference there. One is completely fine, the other prison forever. It's just utterly ridiculous and utterly hypocritical, of course. Israel has killed well over 100 journalists in the war. Yeah, it's like 160 or something. By saying well over, I think they're shooting really low. Strong evidence indicates that Israel deliberately targeted some of the journalists it has killed. This is the most journalists that have ever been killed in any conflict ever, intentionally. Ever. Way more than World War II. Way more than the Vietnam War. Less discussed is that Israel has also arrested dozens of Palestinian journalists. I wasn't even aware of this. I thought they just killed them all. So maybe arrested is better, I guess, of the options. But since October 7th, 2023, as documented by groups like the Committee to Protect Journalists and Reporters Without Borders, as of October 9th, according to CPJ, 43 Palestinian journalists remain imprisoned by Israel, a record number. Many of them are held under administrative detention, which means no charge, no trial. We can just keep you in prison forever. In some instances, even detainees' locations are unknown. This is horrifying what they're trying to do to Jeremy Loffredo. I mean, he is free at the moment, not free to leave Israel, which is not really free. And hopefully they drop this. It will come down, it does seem, to some degree as to what the Biden administration does, because, the Biden administration doesn't give a shit about journalists. They don't give a shit about Grayzone. That's true. But sometimes they don't like the PR. They just think it's not great PR. So they may put the slightest bit of pressure on Israel to drop this.